Welcome to my channel. This is Rainer from Rainier Books. Today I want to do number 51 in my longest running segment, I've Read Something. And the something that I've read is a book, and it's a book by the English author Jonathan Coe, and it's called Middle England. Let's do this. The phrase Middle England, when you see this, Middle England, as a German, as a native German speaker, I first thought of a geographical term, but it's not a geographical term. It's not, because there's nothing like Middle England in geographical terms. You could see at the map of England from the south, from Brighton in the south to Liverpool and Manchester and Newcastle upon Tyne in the north, and say there's a south and there's a north, there should be a middle, but it isn't. Middle England is a socio-political term which generally refers to middle class or lower middle class people in England who hold traditionally conservative or right-wing views. The origins of this term, Middle England, they are not known. The writer Ian Hislop found evidence of the British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury using the term in 1882, but it did not gain popularity at the time. Modern popular usage of the phrase has been attributed to nobody else and none less than Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, in the end of the 1970s, who, according to the historian David Cannadine, introduced the expression into political phraseology by adopting Richard Nixon's concept of Middle America. Middle America, also called flyover states, also called redneck states, is the difference, is the thing that is between the East and the West in the United States. The red belt of the Republican Party, that is Middle America, the heartland, whereas the West and the East are pretty progressive. And the same sort of, not in a geographical sense of the meaning, is meant by Middle England here. Middle England is the middle class, the lower middle class, people who generally have white skin color and who are usually voting conservative. So what is this book about, Middle England? Why do I talk so much about this? You can ask. Why I talk so much about this is that Jonathan Coe, who is now one of my favorite authors right now, because I read also his book, Mr. Wilder and Me, and I liked it very much. And I tell you now that I like Middle England even more. Middle England is a book that was published in 2018. It won the Costa Prize for Best Novel of the Year in 2019. Unfortunately, the Costa Award is not longer existing because Costa, the big coffee company in the UK, they sort of turned it down. It's over with the Costa Award. But nevertheless, this is a winner from 2019, and Coe has written this book in the face and the aftermath of the Brexit, of Great Britain leaving the European Union, where they had been members since 1971, for 50 years almost. Yeah, actually for 50 years. So the story that is told is actually like a history book, but Coe is a writer, he's an author, he's a literary fiction writer, so he made a story of all of this, of the things happening. And that's, I think, one of the best things about literature that I like a lot, that I like very much. I don't actually love so much the play, the execution of different and new forms of telling stories. I think I go more for the stories and for the characters. And I also want to learn something about the human condition. And I also want to learn something about the world that is around me, that is around us. And maybe some attempts to explain what happens in the world around us. So this is exactly what Jonathan Coe does so meticulously good in this book, Middle England. Benjamin Trotter is, I think, in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. He is living in Shrewsbury, which is just outside Birmingham in England, in the middle of England, approximately, probably. And he is in the beginning of the novel, he's at a funeral because his mother has died and his father needs his help. His father is staying the night. There are elections to come. About a week after the funeral of Benjamin's mother, there are elections, and the power in Great Britain, in England, in Great Britain will change from the Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown to the Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, who will become a historical figure in the history of the United Kingdom, because he will be the one to ask the question, to instigate the referendum about the Brexit, about leaving or not leaving the European Union. So this is 1 week before the election, is the funeral of his mother. He has his sister Lois, that means a lot to him. He has his niece Sophie, who is, I think, the second main protagonist of this book. Sophie, who's the younger generation representative in this novel, who is struggling with love, who's struggling to find a place in the life, a profession where she can have a career and also can finance her a decent and honorable life. So she's looking to answer all these kind of questions. She finds a guy, his name is Ian, I think, and because he is the driving instructor, she makes a mistake while driving, and she has to do some kind of re-education for drivers, like we also have in Sweden or in Germany, in order to get her driver's license back. So she goes to that driver's license training, and she meets this guy Ian and falls in love with him, and they two turn out to be a couple, and they even marry. And this is also very important because the relationship between Sophie and her mother-in-law is very, very special. I will read a quote of that relationship later on in that video. Sophie lives in London in the beginning of the novel, but she will move to Birmingham, from the cosmopolitan city of London to Birmingham. But she loves London. Sophie loves London like I do. Here it is on page 25 of my edition. Leaving the train at Marylebone, she found that she had time to walk to her rendezvous with Sohan. Sohan is a very good friend of her. She cut across the Marylebone Road into Gloucester Place and then wandered through the half-empty back streets with their tall, creamy Georgian houses until she reached Marylebone High Street. Here it was livelier, and she had to shuffle and swerve through the crowds of early evening pedestrians. Listening to the different languages on the street, she was reminded of a time a few years earlier when Benjamin, too, was still living in London. Colin and Sheila had come down to see him, and she had gone for dinner with her uncle and grandparents to an Italian place in Piccadilly. "I don't think I heard a word of English spoken on the way here," Colin had said, and she had realized that the thing he was complaining about was the very thing she most liked about this city. Tonight she had already overheard French, Italian, German, Polish, Urdu, Bengali, and a few others she couldn't identify. It didn't bother her that she didn't understand half of what people were saying. The babble of voices added to the sense of benign confusion she loved so much. It was all of a piece with the general noise of the city. The kaleidoscope of color from traffic lights, headlights, brake lights, street lamps and shop windows, the awareness that millions of separate, unknowable lives were temporarily intersecting as people crisscrossed through the streets. She savored these reflections even as she quickened her pace, glancing at the time on her phone screen and worrying that she was going to be a few minutes late reaching the university building. Beautiful paragraph that tells you so much about why Sophie loves London and why I love London. And it also tells you that Colin, her grandfather, doesn't like this cacophony of languages. It has nothing to do with Old England, where he grew up, and Middle England, where he comes from. There's a song, actually, that is treated a song that is almost the soundtrack of this novel. And since I am not allowed to play this song because of the copyrights, it is by the British folk singer, the English folk singer, Shirley Collins. And I cannot sing like Shirley Collins, but I will try at least to sing one of the verses here. Adieu to old England, adieu. And adieu to some hundreds of pounds. If the world had been ended when I had been young, my sorrows I'd never have known. This song is like a soundtrack for the whole novel and for the background of what's happening in the 2010s in London and outside London, in England and in the United Kingdom, the atmosphere turning away, the reminiscence of old England, adieu to old England. Everybody knows that old England is not coming back. I talked about this earlier when I talked about Timothy Snyder and the politics of eternity and the politics of inevitability. I will come back to that in a few seconds. But Jonathan Coe masterfully has created a bunch of characters that sort of explain what happened in the 2010s. In the 2010s, when in 2010, the political power was turned over from Labour again to the Conservatives, to David Cameron. The 2011 riots, primarily in London, but also in other cities, when a black person was killed in, I think, Tottenham, and when there broke out riots in a lot of places in England, and lootings happened, and there was some kind of revolt going on, but it was sort of calmed down and swept under the carpet. Then 2012, the Olympic Games that come to London, to the city of London. I've been there to London in 2012, and I saw the Olympic Games that sort of gave the opportunity to show the world again how big this empire was. The incredible opening ceremony, the best opening ceremony that I have ever seen and that probably we will ever see of Olympic Games, because the UK put everything into that Olympic ceremony, with Paul McCartney and Elton John, with The Who and you name it, of Kylie Minogue from Australia. And they brought so much pop music, so much fashion, so much joy into that, but also so much greatness and strength, and showing the world that the UK, old England, was back, like in 2012, to show the world that they were perfect hosts for the Olympic Games. And then marching after also the economic crisis, which came in 2008 and which lasted for a couple of years, and people didn't feel well. And it also shows with the characters, with Sophie and her husband Ian, and with their stepmother, with their mother-in-law Helena, it shows how people were gliding away from each other and how they weren't capable of talking to each other anymore. And that's the time to play a little quote from this part of the novel. Sophie froze when she heard these words, and the platitudes died on her lips. The silence that opened up between her and Helena was fathomless now. Here it was, after all, the subject that couldn't be discussed. The subject that divided people more than any other, mortified people more than any other, because to bring it up was to strip off your own clothes and to tear off the other person's clothes, and to be forced to stare at each other naked, unprotected, with no way of averting your eyes. Any reply she made to Helena at this moment, any reply that tried to give an honest sense of her own differing views, would immediately mean confronting the unspeakable truth, that Sophie and everyone like her, and Helena and everyone like her, might be living cheek by jowl in the same country, but they also lived in different universes. And these universes were separated by a wall, infinitely high, impermeable, a wall built out of fear and suspicion, and even perhaps a little bit of those most English of all qualities, shame and embarrassment. Benjamin Trotter lives a quite lonely life in this old and big house in Shrewsbury outside Birmingham. He writes his novel, I think it's a 1,000-page novel, and the novel becomes a huge success. He gets nominated for the Booker long list. So the Booker is inside this book. It's a Booker book. And in the background of this, you also have the story of Middle England, of England sort of getting more and more conflicts within the population where people are not capable of talking to each other. The divisions are rising. When the question is posed for the Brexit, because David Cameron, actually, he's for staying in the European Union, but he wants to have this question asked, this referendum about the European Union. So he wants to have this question asked, and suddenly it goes wrong, because there's so many people and so many institutions that see a chance of leaving the European Union and of becoming that old Britain, that old England again, with no rules from Brussels, that is free again, that is making Britain great again? No, maybe. Politics of eternity? Which means you go back to a certain point in time where everything was beautiful. There weren't so many Polish and Romanian people, and from people from other countries in the UK. Everything was beautiful. Everybody spoke Cockney in London. So some people want to go back there, want to go back to that, to find a point in history that should be eternal. The politics of eternity are back. Read and listen to Timothy Snyder. That's what I can tell you. And this book is, Middle England, is so perfectly executed. What Coe wants to tell us the story of the Brexit and the changes that have happened in England in the 2010s, in this decade until 2017, 2018. It also shows that there are very strong foundations that are behind the propaganda of Brexit. It also shows that there are Russian bots who have influenced the opinion of people voting for Brexit to destabilize the European Union. And this all is sort of packed into a novel that is a great novel. And that is an achievement by Jonathan Coe that I absolutely love. And I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful to NatGalley that they sent me actually the new book by Jonathan Coe, which is called Bourneville, which will be published in November of 2022. Thank you and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Adieu to old England, adieu, and adieu to some hundreds of pounds. If the world